There's a house in Vermont that still stands, though no one's lived in it since 1973. The windows are boarded, the land is overgrown, but if you ask anyone in the town of Greenvale about the Latham property, they'll change the subject. They'll find a reason to walk away, because everyone there knows what happened to the daughters. Every single one of them. For over 200 years, not a single girl born into the Latham bloodline lived long enough to say her first word. Not one. They would smile, they would crawl, they would reach for their mothers, and then, always before their first birthday, they would die, silent. The doctors had no answers, the church had only prayers, and the family had only grief, until 1968, when everything changed, when one daughter didn't die, and when she opened her mouth for the first time, she didn't speak, she sang, and what she sang made her mother run screaming from the house. Hello everyone, before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. This is not folklore. This is not legend. This is documented family history, recorded in birth certificates, death records, and personal letters that were sealed for decades. The Latham family tried to bury this story. The town tried to forget it, but the truth doesn't stay buried, and tonight you're going to hear it all. The Latham line began in 1791, when Thomas Latham and his wife Eleanor settled in what would become Greenvale, Vermont. They built a home on the eastern edge of town, near the woods. Thomas was a carpenter. Eleanor was a midwife. They were respected, normal, unremarkable. In 1793, Eleanor gave birth to their first child. A daughter. They named her Grace. She had Eleanor's eyes and Thomas's dark hair. She was healthy. She was beautiful. And at 9 months old, without warning, without illness, Grace died in her sleep. The grief nearly destroyed them, but they tried again. In 1795, they had another daughter, Mary. She lived to be 10 months old. Then she too died. No fever, no cough, just gone. By the time their third daughter died in 1800, the whispers had already started. People began to avoid Eleanor at the market. Neighbors stopped visiting, because everyone could see it now. Something was wrong. By 1820, 3 generations of Latham daughters had come and gone. The family kept meticulous records. As if documentation might somehow break the curse they refused to name. Thomas and Eleanor's son, William, married a woman named Catherine Morse in 1817. Catherine was strong, willed, educated, a schoolteacher who believed in reason over superstition. When William told her about his sisters, she dismissed it as tragic coincidence. Infant mortality was common then. Medicine was primitive. She would be different. She would be careful. In 1819, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Hope. The name was intentional, defiant. For 8 months, Hope thrived. She was alert, active, always watching the world with wide, curious eyes. Then one morning in April, Catherine went to wake her, and Hope was cold. The doctor found nothing. No signs of struggle, no indication of disease. Catherine refused to accept it. She demanded a second opinion, then a third. Every physician said the same thing: natural causes, unexplained death, it happens, but it kept happening. Catherine had 3 more daughters over the next decade. Rebecca lived 9 months. Abigail lived 7 months. Charlotte lived 11 months, the longest any Latham daughter had ever survived. Each time, Catherine grew more desperate. She consulted doctors in Boston, New York, even Philadelphia. She changed their diets, their sleeping arrangements, the temperature of the house. She watched them constantly, sleeping in shifts with William, never leaving them alone. Nothing worked. By 1835, Catherine had stopped speaking to neighbors entirely. She stopped going to church. She would sit in the nursery for hours, staring at the empty cradle, whispering to herself. William documented everything in his journals, now preserved in the Vermont Historical Society. His entries became increasingly disturbed. He wrote about dreams where he heard infant voices singing in languages he didn't recognize. He wrote about waking in the night to find Catherine standing over their daughter's cribs, not checking on them, just standing there motionless in the dark. In 1837, he wrote something that the Historical Society initially refused to include in their public archives. Quote, "Catherine says she hears them, all of them. She says they never stopped singing. She says they're waiting for something. I fear my wife is losing her mind, or perhaps I am losing mine, because last night I heard it too." The Latham family continued. They had sons who survived, who married, who had children of their own. And every single time a daughter was born, the same thing happened. She would live for months, healthy and normal, developing right on schedule. Then, always before her first birthday, always without warning, she would die. By 1850, the town had a name for it, Latham's affliction. Doctors came from 3 states to study the family. They tested the water, the soil, the air in the house. They examined the mothers before and after birth. They performed autopsies on the infants, finding nothing abnormal, no genetic disorder, no environmental poison, no medical explanation. The daughters simply died. And they died silent. Not one of them, in over 70 years, had ever made a sound beyond crying, not a coo, not a babble, not a single attempt at speech. It was as if something stopped them, as if something was waiting. By 1820, 3 generations of Latham daughters had come and gone. The family kept meticulous records, as if documentation might somehow break the curse they refused to name. Thomas and Eleanor's son, William, married a woman named Catherine Morse in 1817. Catherine was strong, willed, educated, a schoolteacher who believed in reason over superstition. When William told her about his sisters, she dismissed it as tragic coincidence. Infant mortality was common then. Medicine was primitive. She would be different. She would be careful. In 1819, Catherine gave birth to a daughter they named Hope. The name was intentional, defiant. For 8 months, Hope thrived. She was alert, active, always watching the world with wide, curious eyes. Then one morning in April, Catherine went to wake her, and Hope was cold. The doctor found nothing, no signs of struggle, no indication of disease. Catherine refused to accept it. She demanded a second opinion, then a third. Every physician said the same thing. Natural causes. Unexplained death. It happens. But it kept happening. Catherine had 3 more daughters over the next decade. Rebecca lived 9 months. Abigail lived 7 months. Charlotte lived 11 months. The longest any Latham daughter had ever survived. Each time, Catherine grew more desperate. She consulted doctors in Boston, New York, even Philadelphia. She changed their diets, their sleeping arrangements, the temperature of the house. Nothing worked. By 1835, Catherine had stopped speaking to neighbors entirely. She stopped going to church. She would sit in the nursery for hours, staring at the empty cradle, whispering to herself. William documented everything in his journals, now preserved in the Vermont Historical Society. His entries became increasingly disturbed. He wrote about dreams where he heard infant voices singing in languages he didn't recognize. He wrote about waking in the night to find Catherine standing over their daughter's cribs, not checking on them, just standing there motionless in the dark. In 1837, he wrote something that the Historical Society initially refused to include in their public archives. Quote, "Catherine says she hears them, all of them. She says they never stopped singing. She says they're waiting for something." The pattern continued unbroken into the modern era. By 1900, the Latham family had lost 43 daughters, 43. Medical science had advanced dramatically. Infant mortality rates were dropping nationwide. But not for Latham girls. In 1912, A daughter named Alice was born to Robert and Margaret Latham. Margaret was a nurse. She knew medicine, knew anatomy, knew every possible complication that could arise. She monitored Alice obsessively, weight, temperature, breathing patterns, everything. Alice was healthy by every measurable standard. At 10 months old, Margaret found her dead in her crib on a Tuesday morning in March. The autopsy revealed nothing. Margaret demanded they check again. They did. Nothing. She began researching every medical journal she could find, looking for anything that matched the pattern. Genetic disorders, metabolic conditions, environmental toxins, infectious diseases. She found nothing that explained why only the daughters died, why only before their first birthday, why they never vocalized beyond basic crying. In 1915, Margaret had another daughter, Helen. She didn't sleep for months, checking on Helen every hour, terrified of missing something. Helen died at 8 months. Margaret had a complete mental breakdown. She was institutionalized for 2 years. Robert's journals from this period are heartbreaking. He wrote about visiting Margaret at the asylum, about how she would grab his hands and beg him to tell her what she'd done wrong. She was convinced she'd failed somehow, that she'd missed something obvious. The doctors told Robert that maternal guilt was common in cases of infant loss, but Margaret wasn't just grieving, she was obsessed. She told the asylum staff that she could hear her daughters at night, that they were trying to tell her something, that they were singing. By 1930, the family had adapted to the horror in the only way they could. They stopped naming daughters immediately. They would wait, see if the child survived past 1 year, then hold a naming ceremony. It never happened. Every daughter died unnamed. The family began keeping the pregnancies secret when they knew it was a girl. They stopped having funerals. They would bury the infants quietly, privately, in a section of the family plot that had no headstones. Just small metal markers with dates, no names, nothing to remember them by. It was easier that way, less painful, or so they told themselves. In 1947, Daniel Latham married a woman named Virginia Hayes. Daniel was the first in his family to leave Greenvale, moving to Burlington to work as an accountant. Virginia knew about the family history. Daniel had been honest with her before they married. She'd researched it herself, reading through old family records, medical reports, everything she could find. Virginia was a chemist, rational and methodical. She believed every mystery had a solution. When she became pregnant in 1952, she prepared. She consulted with specialists at Johns Hopkins. She had her blood tested, her genetics analyzed as much as was possible at the time. Everything came back normal. When the ultrasound showed a girl, Virginia didn't panic. She planned. She documented everything about her pregnancy, her diet, her environment. She kept detailed logs of every vitamin, every meal, every variable she could control. In January 1953, she gave birth to a healthy daughter. They decided to name her Sarah, breaking the family's recent tradition. Virginia refused to live in fear. If something was going to take her daughter, she would face it directly. For 7 months, Sarah was perfect. She smiled, she laughed, she rolled over right on schedule. Virginia monitored her constantly, but tried not to let fear consume her. She took Sarah to pediatricians monthly, sometimes weekly. Every checkup showed a healthy, thriving infant. Then, in August, something changed. Sarah stopped making sounds, not crying. She still cried when hungry or uncomfortable. But the babbling, the cooing, the experimental noises that infants make, they stopped completely. Virginia noticed immediately. She took Sarah to 3 different doctors. None of them were concerned. Some babies were quieter than others. Give it time. At 8 months, Sarah started staring at empty corners of rooms. Her eyes would track something invisible, following movement that wasn't there. Virginia would turn to look and see nothing. Daniel thought it was just infant vision development, the way babies sometimes focus on dust particles or shadows. But Virginia knew the family history. She knew what Catherine had written in her letters, what Margaret had told the asylum doctors. They heard them singing. In September, Virginia started sleeping in Sarah's room, watching her daughter every night. She was terrified but also curious, waiting to see if what happened to the others would happen to her daughter. She kept a journal by the crib, writing down every observation, every unusual moment. On October 2nd, she wrote, "Sarah stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes today. Her lips were moving. I heard nothing, but I swear to God, she was trying to form words." October 9th, 1953. 3 days before Sarah's 9th-month birthday, Virginia was exhausted, running on almost no sleep, surviving on coffee and determination. Daniel had begged her to rest, to let him take over for one night, but she refused. She couldn't explain why, but she felt like something was coming, something final. She sat in the rocking chair next to Sarah's crib, watching her daughter sleep in the dim glow of the nightlight. At 2:17 in the morning, Sarah's eyes opened. Not the slow, groggy waking of a baby, but instant alertness. Her eyes were focused, aware in a way that seemed wrong for an infant. Virginia leaned forward, her heart pounding. Sarah turned her head slowly toward her mother, and for just a moment, Virginia saw something in her daughter's expression that terrified her. Recognition, understanding, things a 9-month-old shouldn't be capable of. Then Sarah opened her mouth, and she sang, not babbling, not random infant sounds, a melody, clear, structured, haunting. The tune was nothing Virginia had ever heard, nothing that existed on any radio or record. It was old, impossibly old, like something from another time or another place entirely. Sarah's voice shouldn't have been able to produce those sounds. Her vocal cords weren't developed enough. But the song continued, perfect pitch, perfect rhythm, filling the small nursery with something that felt wrong on a level Virginia couldn't articulate. Virginia sat frozen, unable to move, unable to breathe. Sarah sang for 30 seconds, maybe 40. Her eyes never left her mother's face. Then, as suddenly as it started, the singing stopped. Sarah smiled. A real smile, not the reflexive expressions of infancy, but something knowing, something aware, and then she went limp, just like that. Her eyes closed, her tiny chest stopped moving. Virginia screamed. She grabbed Sarah, shaking her, begging her to breathe. Daniel ran into the room. They called an ambulance. By the time it arrived, Sarah had been gone for 6 minutes. The doctors said it was sudden infant death syndrome, tragic but not uncommon. They offered condolences, grief counseling resources, support groups. Virginia said nothing. She went home in a daze, moving through the funeral arrangements like a ghost. Daniel tried to comfort her, but she wouldn't speak to him, wouldn't speak to anyone. For 3 days, she sat in the nursery, staring at the empty crib. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? On the 4th day, Virginia went to the town library. She requested every record they had on the Latham family going back to 1791. Birth records, death records, family Bibles, personal letters, everything. She spread it all out on a table and began cross-referencing dates, locations, causes of death. She worked for 14 hours straight. What Virginia found wasn't in the official records. It was in the margins, little notes, annotations that family members had added over the decades, references to things that seemed meaningless individually but formed a pattern when viewed together. Catherine Latham had written in 1838 about her daughter Charlotte humming in the weeks before her death. Not singing, not making normal baby sounds, but humming a specific tune that Catherine couldn't identify. Margaret Latham, the nurse, had written in 1914 that Alice had moved her lips silently for days before dying, as if practicing something. Virginia found references going back 7 generations. Daughters who stared at empty spaces. Daughters who stopped making normal infant sounds but seemed to be listening to something. Daughters whose lips moved soundlessly. And buried in a letter from 1862, Virginia found something that made her blood run cold. A woman named Elizabeth Latham had written to her sister describing the night her daughter died. Quote, she sang, "Martha, I know you'll think me mad, but I heard it clear as day, a song in no language I know." Her voice was not her own. It was many voices, all the girls who came before. And when she finished, she looked at me with eyes that knew too much, and then she was gone. I believe they were teaching her something. I believe she finally learned it. Virginia took the letter to Daniel. He read it 3 times, his face growing paler with each reading. They'd never discussed the specific circumstances of Sarah's death. Virginia had been too traumatized, and Daniel had assumed it was too painful to revisit. Now she told him everything, the song, the awareness in Sarah's eyes, the sense that something had been completed. Daniel wanted to dismiss it as grief-induced delusion, but he couldn't, because he'd heard something that night too. He'd been in the hallway when Sarah sang, and the sound had frozen him in place. It wasn't just a song. It was many songs, layered over each other, dozens of voices singing in impossible harmony. They began investigating together. They contacted distant Latham relatives, people who'd married into the family and moved away. They found stories that had never been written down. A cousin in Ohio said her grandmother had told her about the singing. A nephew in Maine said his father had forbidden anyone from discussing what happened to the daughters, but he'd overheard conversations about voices in the night. Every branch of the family knew something, and everyone had been too terrified to speak openly about it. In 1957, Virginia found a diary that had belonged to Eleanor Latham, the matriarch, Thomas's wife, from 1791. It had been stored in a safety deposit box that no one had opened in over a century. The final entry was dated the day before Eleanor died in 1823. She wrote, "I know now what they are doing. The girls are not lost. They are gathered. Each one adds her voice to the chorus. They are waiting for something, building towards something. I hear them in my sleep now, all of them together, singing a song that will unmake the world when it is finally complete. God forgive me. God forgive us all for what we've brought into this world." Virginia and Daniel never had another child. They moved away from Vermont in 1959 and never returned. Virginia spent the rest of her life researching the Latham line, trying to find the origin of whatever had attached itself to the family. She found nothing. No curses, no traumatic event, no clear beginning. It was as if the pattern had always existed, waiting for the Latham family to come into being so it could express itself through them. The last Latham daughter was born in 1968. Daniel's cousin Robert and his wife Anne had moved to Greenvale, back to the original family property, believing that distance had been the problem. Anne was convinced that if they raised their daughter in the place where it all began, somehow the pattern would break. They named her Claire. For 8 months, Claire was healthy. Then the staring began, the silence, the lip movements. Robert set up a tape recorder in Claire's room, running constantly, hoping to capture evidence of whatever was happening. On October 15, 1968, at 3:30, 2 in the morning, the recorder captured it. Claire's voice, singing that impossible melody. But this time there was more. In the background, barely audible, dozens of other voices joined her. All the daughters, spanning 200 years, singing together in perfect harmony. The song lasted for 2 minutes and 17 seconds. When it ended, there was silence. Then Claire's final breath. Then nothing. Robert and Anne left that night. They abandoned the house with everything still inside. The tape recorder, the nursery furniture, everything. They never spoke about Claire publicly. The house remained empty. In 1973, the town of Greenvale tried to demolish it, but the construction crew refused after the first day. They reported hearing voices inside, children singing. The project was abandoned. The house still stands, boarded up, slowly being reclaimed by the forest. Virginia died in 2003. In her final months, she told Daniel that she'd figured it out, not what it was, but what it wanted. She believed the daughters weren't victims, they were instruments, each one adding her voice to something larger, something that had been building for over 2 centuries. And Sarah, her Sarah, had been close to finishing it. Whatever it was, the song wasn't complete yet, but it was getting closer. Daniel asked her what would happen when it was finished. Virginia looked at him with the same expression he'd seen on Sarah's face that night in 1953. Knowing, aware, she said, then they'll all sing together, and we'll finally hear what they've been trying to tell us. The Latham line continues through the male descendants. There hasn't been a daughter born to the family since 1968. No one knows if the pattern is over or if it's simply waiting. The house in Greenvale remains standing, the graves remain unmarked, and sometimes on quiet nights, people in town report hearing something on the wind. Children's voices, singing a song that no one recognizes, a melody that gets a little longer every time someone hears it, building towards something, still waiting, still not finished. Some stories don't end. They just wait for the right moment to continue.